Welcome to the 2022 Summer Forum. Today, we are going to be discussing issues around poverty law and criminal law and death penalty representation. We are very excited for our two panels today. They are some of the richest of the Summer Forum. A couple of housekeeping things. Let us know who is in the audience by putting your name and organization in the chat. In addition, our panels today will run an hour. So the first panel discussion will be from noon until 1 o'clock, and they'll have an opportunity to ask specific questions of the panelists or discuss the issues we just heard about amongst ourselves. So once the panel is done, if you have a specific question for the panelists, you can raise your hand and I will be able to allow you to speak. If you have a general question or something that you want to clarify, please feel free to put it in the Q&A and we will monitor that as we go along. And so those general questions that will benefit everyone, we can answer while everyone is here. At 1:15, we will start our second panel, the criminal law panel. That panel will run from 1:15 to 2:15. And then again, from 2:15 to 2:30, we'll have an opportunity to ask specific questions and talk with the panelists. So again, if you have general questions or clarifying questions, please put them in the Q&A. Otherwise, stay after and we will raise your hand and you will be able to ask those questions. We are recording both sessions today and you will get the recordings and the follow-up information, including contact information for our panelists in the follow-up email like you did last week. And with that, I am going to turn it over to our moderator for our poverty law panel, Debbie Cuevas-Hill, who is with Legal Counsel for the Elderly, and she is going to introduce the panel. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you, Christina, and welcome everyone to this year's Poverty Law panel. I'm so lucky to be the moderator with this distinguished panel. The panel will explore how pro bono and public interest lawyers are critical in aiding vulnerable communities, particularly coming out of the pandemic. My plan today is to go through our distinguished panel and ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves and also tell us about their practice. I see Tracy on my left, so I'm going to start with Tracy Goodman. Tracy leads Healthy Together, the medical legal partnership at the Children's Law Center. Welcome, Tracy. Tracy, if you could go, I'm sorry, if you could go ahead and tell us a little bit about your practice at Children's Law Center, and then I'll go around and ask each of the other panelists as well about their practice and their work.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Debbie. And thank you so much to the Washington Council of Lawyers for hosting this summer forum, inviting me to participate. I think it's such a wonderful event. I'm happy to be here with you and Sebastian, Ashley, and Harmony. I'm looking forward to Judge McCabe's closing remarks as well. Again, my name is Tracy Goodman. I'm an attorney at Children's Law Center, and I've been practicing public interest law for almost 25 years, which when I say that out loud, it just doesn't really compute. And there are many ways to do this work, and I think everyone's going to be hearing about some of that today. I started out working at Legal Aid in Maryland, representing children in the child welfare system for several years, and then I had a small stint working at an NGO in Brazil for a couple of years, and then I landed a staff attorney job at Children's Law Center back in 2002, and I just basically have been unable to tear myself away from the work and the community that I serve and that I learn from on a daily basis. At Children's Law Center, we're a nonprofit legal services organization in DC. We've got about 90-ish staff working with the goal of every child in DC being able to grow up with a loving family, good health, and a quality education. Underlying that mission is the core belief that every child deserves to live in a world in which racism and trauma, poverty, are eliminated as barriers to success. And so we've got our in-house team, and then we've got hundreds of pro bono lawyers who are helping us reach more than 5,000 kids and families each year. So my role now at Children's Law Center is that I'm directing Healthy Together, which is our medical legal partnership with Children's National Hospital, Unity Healthcare, and Mary Center. And essentially the medical legal partnership model is integrating lawyers into the healthcare treatment team. And so that's pediatricians and other healthcare providers referring families to us who are experiencing, health harming legal needs. So those are just legal problems that are impacting negatively kids' health and well-being. So it's a lot of education practice, housing conditions, access to healthcare, some public benefits work. And what this is looking like in terms of what we do on a day-to-day basis is we're working with families of kids who have disabilities or special needs who aren't getting the education that they're legally entitled to receive under federal and local law. It's families living in unhealthy housing because, landlords or property owners aren't keeping units up to code. Children not getting medically necessary mental health or physical health treatments or medications, because of Medicaid denials or terminations. So all of these issues that I'm talking about are problems that actually have legal solutions. And so that's where the legal services lawyer can step in to have great impact on kids and families. I did also want to mention that in addition to the Medical Legal Partnership at Children's Law Center, we also have other types of legal service provision. So we've got a team of guardians ad litem, and education lawyers, social workers, and investigators who are advocating for the best interest of children in the foster care system. We also provide legal services to caregivers seeking custody or guardianship of children in foster care, so, as well as serving as guardians ad litem in contentious custody cases. And then in addition to all of that, which is the direct legal services that we're providing, Children's Law Center also has a very robust systemic and policy advocacy practice, and that is all focused on the mental and behavioral health work, child welfare, education, as well as healthy housing. So that is my my quick-ish summary.
Thank you. I have lots of follow-up questions, but I want to make sure that folks get a chance to tell us about their practice areas as well. Thank you for that overview, Tracy. Next, I want to turn to Sebastian Monson-Rueda. He is a staff attorney at Legal Counsel for the Elderly in the Tenant Advocacy and Support practice. Welcome, Sebastian. Do you mind telling us about your work at Legal Counsel for the Elderly?
Sure, Debbie. It's funny that you ask because Debbie is also my colleague at Legal Counsel for the Elderly. So hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sebastian. I work with low-income seniors in the district and provide legal representation in DC courts for eviction defense, also discrimination cases in DC agencies, all the way to reasonable accommodation requests with the DC housing authorities and other private landlords. As far as my practice, the bulk of it is eviction defense, especially recently, now that the eviction moratorium is completely gone, and also that any rental assistance from the American Rescue Plan is also depleted. So now evictions are picking up, and so we're looking for lots of pro bono help to help us with that. But generally, I can go more into this later, but that's the bulk of my work.
Thank you for that, Sebastian. And with that, I should say that I work in the consumer advocacy and home preservation practice at Legal Counsel for the Elderly, and the bulk of my work is foreclosure defense. Like Sebastian said, coming out of the moratoriums is what's keeping us busy these days. In DC, we have a foreclosure moratorium that actually lifts June 30th. And in terms of the American Rescue Plan, the funds for that for foreclosure work is only recently going to become available to homeowners. And we know that a program will launch on June 22nd so that folks can start to access those vital funds to preserve their homes. But just wanted to give you all a little sense of the work that I do. And next, turn it over to Harmony Jones, who is Deputy Pro Bono Counsel at Steptoe & Johnson. Welcome, Harmony. Can you tell us a little bit about your work?
Sure. Thank you so much, Debbie. My name is Harmony Jones, Deputy Pro Bono Counsel at law firm of Steptoe. Prior to this, I just wanted to mention that I was a staff attorney at Legal Aid Society and Neighborhood Legal Services in DC, providing direct representation to clients there. So I've continued to do some of that work in my role now. I also wanted to mention, I know we have a lot of summers here. During my summer, I split between 2 different law firms and also the DC Public Defender Service. And when I started my career, I was a law clerk, then a pro bono fellow, then a commercial litigation associate at a big law firm. and then worked at those public interest organizations and now sort of putting it all together. So I just wanted to mention that because I know as a law student, I was trying to figure out, I've got to pick, am I going to be a public interest lawyer? Am I going to work at a law firm? Am I going to work in government? And I just wanted to sort of make the pitch that no matter where you are in your career path, and hopefully that's long and varied, there is always an opportunity to give back and to volunteer and to do pro bono work. And I think that's one of the responsibilities that we do. It's a responsibility and a privilege of being a lawyer, is that we are able to provide those services and give people access to justice. So just a little bit about my role now. I think it's an amazing experience. I get to help oversee our pro bono practice at the firm, which is very varied. We work with all the organizations represented here today and many others in DC and across the country. We do a lot of housing work, evictions and conditions work, public benefits cases, which I've continued on to do, as well as a lot of immigration work and criminal justice work, and even death penalty appeals. And one of the favorite parts about my job is to sort of work with the lawyers in the firm and the summer associates now, and just figure out the areas that you are passionate about, where you want to make a change, what your life experiences have been, and how we can sort of match those experiences with the pro bono work that you can do while you're at the firm.
Thank you so much for that, Harmony. That is really important. Words that you said regarding you don't have to pick one path as a law student or as a lawyer. I completely agree. There's always a way to give back, and we'll explore a lot of that during this panel. So thank you for starting us off with that conversation. Next, I want to turn it over to Ashley Carter, who is the managing attorney in DC VLP's Domestic Violence and Policy Appellate Advocacy Practice. Ashley, welcome. And can you tell us a bit about your work?
Absolutely. And I want to echo my fellow panelists. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on this panel. I'm really thrilled to be here with so many incredible colleagues and to talk about the work that we do. So as Debbie mentioned, I work at the DC Volunteer Lawyers Project. We are a relatively young legal services organization here in the District of Columbia. We were created in 2012. With the basic tenet that we believe that a life free of violence, whether that is domestic violence, child abuse, sexual assault, is a basic human right, and that we should do everything in our power to interrupt cycles of violence, which also intersect with cycles of poverty that keep our clients sort of oppressed and do not allow for social mobility for those living in poverty. So we serve in a number of different practice areas. So I, as Debbie mentioned, manage our domestic violence practice, which is focused on both civil protection orders, so sort of that emergency domestic violence order, as well as family law representation for survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. We also have an immigration practice that provides services to survivors of gender-based violence, whether that be domestic violence, sexual assault, or some other form of violence. We also have a child advocacy practice, and similarly to Children's Law Center, we do represent children in high conflict custody cases as guardians ad litem. And then our newest practice area is the other practice area that I manage, our appellate and policy practice. We also believe that there is a lot of room for systemic advocacy for survivors of violence, for children who are at risk of violence. So we do provide direct representation in appeal matters, and we also provide systemic advocacy for policies that benefit our clients and will help alleviate poverty. So those are some of the practice areas that we have. We are focused on leveraging pro bono services at DC Volunteer Lawyers Project. So the majority of our practice is partnering with pro bono lawyers to leverage the resources of pro bono and to leverage our own resources to represent as many individuals as possible and provide legal services to as many people as possible. So we do work mainly with pro bono attorneys, with supervising attorneys as the subject matter experts. So we have a number of incredible law firm partners in the city. I actually joined our organization as an Equal Justice Works Fellow several years ago, sponsored by Greenberg Traurig and Steptoe and Johnson. So very grateful for their involvement in my project and the involvement of so many other legal service providers and so many other law firms to partner with us to really make sure that we're providing wraparound legal services to those living in poverty.
Thank you for that, Ashley. Well, let's go ahead and dive into these questions about pro bono service and public interest lawyering. First, I wanted to ask Sebastian, how does pro bono service and public interest lawyering advance access to justice in your practice area?
So in eviction defense and landlord tenant law, generally over 90% of tenants are unrepresented in court, compared to the opposite, only over 90% of landlords are represented in court. So there is a huge disadvantage to being a tenant, particularly if you have fallen behind on your rent, because you cannot afford an attorney to represent you in this essentially what's a debt collection case. So in my practice and other legal services organizations throughout the district that focus on eviction defense, we provide legal advice and representation on the long list of rights that tenants have in the district. DC is a very tenant-friendly jurisdiction in terms of its law, but most tenants are unaware of those rights. And oftentimes, if they represent themselves, they often waive all those rights when they try to negotiate directly with the landlord's attorney. And so in my role, it's an opportunity for tenants to not only enforce their rights, but actually sue back for against the landlord to recover any rent due to their neglect of the conditions of their home.
That's such important work, Sebastian. Harmony, do you mind if I ask you the same question as well? Can you tell me how pro bono service and public interest lawyering can advance access to justice in your view?
Absolutely. So during my time previous to being pro bono counsel, I spent a lot of time at Legal Aid Society and Neighborhood Legal Services doing intake. And I will tell you the amount of clients, potential clients that walk through the door in desperate need of advice and representation was just overwhelming. And in intake, I wanted to provide every single one of them with representation, but that is just not even close to possible. And so a lot of my job, and it was a difficult part of the job, was telling people, I'm so sorry, we're not able to represent you. And the next question would be, well, who can? And oftentimes the answer was, no one. We can give you some advice, but we just do not have the resources to represent everyone. And oftentimes there wasn't other places available that could provide that representation. So now sort of being on the other side of that, I think it's a real great opportunity to be able to fill in the gap for some of those cases. And oftentimes when we were at Legal Aid and we were sitting there thinking, like, this is a very compelling case, but every single staff attorney here is at capacity, above capacity. What are we going to do? To be able to say, like, perhaps we could, refer this to a pro bono attorney in the government or at another law firm was huge. And it was a huge relief to the client when we said, well, maybe we can see if somebody is able to take your case, but we cannot. To be able to call them back and say, listen, you have a pro bono attorney, we're going to provide oversight and supervision, but this person will take good care of you. And oftentimes that pro bono attorney, obviously you have a whole other billable practice, but this was the one pro bono client that you were able to dedicate your services to, and it can make a huge difference. So for the thousands of clients that the legal services organizations have to sort of turn down, pro bono can help fill in that gap a little bit, and as well as just getting an opportunity to see what's going on. I know for a lot of our attorneys, we would sit in housing court with some of the pro bono attorneys who had never experienced that before. And like Sebastian was saying, the vast majority, almost over 90% of the tenants were unrepresented. And I would sit there with the attorneys who wanted to say, like, oh, they don't know, like, this is a basic right. You don't have to leave. You don't take that deal because you owe, $1,000 and say you're going to move out. But they just weren't aware of that. So to have the difference between saying, like, I'm sorry, you have to navigate this complicated legal system alone, or you can have an advocate sitting next to you, can make all the difference in the world. And I also feel like it's eye-opening for a lot of us who are not in that practice every day. And hopefully we can support these organizations by taking pro bono cases and also financially supporting them, because there's never enough financial resources to go around as well. And I just also wanted to touch a little bit about sort of my own personal experience. I grew up in poverty in DC and Maryland. And our family, there were 7 kids, and we relied on Section 8 vouchers and food stamps and Medicaid. And just sitting there in these complicated systems, when you go to the doctor and hear, like, oh, I'm sorry, you have no benefits, what it means to have someone to help you navigate that, for me as a kid, was huge. And it seems sometimes it can seem complicated to us too, but a little bit less complicated because you have this training. So to be able to advocate for someone, even if it oftentimes shouldn't need a lawyer to get your food stamps turned back on, can make a huge difference for just the peace of mind of people that are like facing these systems and these situations, which is oftentimes life or death, or how are you going to feed your children? So I can't state it enough. I think it's a huge sort of benefit and privilege and responsibility for us to sort of take on. And, you know, as lawyers and legal professionals, I think I said this before, but I do think we are gatekeepers to the system. It's a complicated system and we sort of created that. And so now I think we can make a huge difference by helping people to navigate that system, which includes a lot of barriers and a lot of roadblocks and disadvantages for people that do not have financial resources and people of color. So we can make a big difference.
I couldn't agree more, Harmony. As lawyers, I do think that we are gatekeepers, and I am so grateful for all of you who are experts in your practice areas to give your time today, because I agree that listening to our clients, giving them advice, representing them, providing referrals, all of the support you mentioned is key, but also sort of training the next generation of lawyers and letting them know about all of these opportunities by attending these types of panels is also important. So thank you all again for your time. And on that note of how others can help and how they can become engaged in pro bono opportunities, I want to turn to Tracy and ask you, what are the opportunities for pro bono service in DC in your practice area, Tracy?
Well, I am so glad you asked, and I really couldn't have stated it any better than Harmony about the benefit, privilege, and opportunity that pro bono service can provide. Really, in our practice areas of special education, housing, and family law, pro bono attorneys are key partners in all of that. We cannot meet the need in-house alone, like Harmony was saying. When people are calling, potential clients are calling for assistance, and you don't have anybody who can take a case, it's not overly dramatic to say that without pro bono attorneys, many children and families would just not be able to have a lawyer by their side to advocate for them. Pro bono lawyers that work on our cases are in private practice. They are in-house counsel, government solo practice, litigators and non-litigators. And really, like as we speak, there are hundreds of lawyers across DC providing pro bono services to families needing special ed advocacy, housing conditions advocacy, and family law assistance. Each year, Children's Law Center places about 200 new pro bono cases. So it's a very robust practice. I think Harmony was alluding to this and mentioning it, but you know, the pro bono service and the public interest arena really offers so many opportunities. Of course, access to justice for the client, but the pro bono attorney themselves, you know, can really get a lot of benefit from it. They have hands-on lawyering, working within the community. If you're in a special education case, you are actually working with the school system, with teachers, related service providers. You're in the schools, you're doing client counseling, negotiating. There are litigation opportunities in all of those practice areas. And then, of course, at the core is that, you know, through that work, you're getting concrete results for kids and families. So there are lots of opportunities. And I know that, and we can maybe throw this in the chat too, if people are interested in having a pro bono case from Children's Law Center, we can certainly make that happen.
Thank you, Tracy. Ashley, I know your practice also is built on a lot of pro bono help as well. Can you tell us about opportunities for pro bono service in your practice area?
Absolutely. I would echo everything Tracy said. You know, there is just, and everything that Harmony said, there is such an enormous need. We have people walk in every day that we have to turn away because we just don't have capacity. And it is really heartbreaking to have to tell a client, we really truly don't have anyone available. So leveraging the fact that we have pro bono attorneys makes our practice possible. We have a number of different kinds of opportunities depending on what your time commitment is. We have walk-in legal clinics throughout the city where pro bono attorneys can sit for an afternoon and conduct intake and give brief advice, sometimes draft pleadings on the spot, and make an enormous difference in someone's case just in an afternoon. We have pro bono opportunities in every single one of our practice areas to take on cases for full representation, whether that's a protection order case, which is very short, very quick, very intense. If you know that for the next month you have free time, you can get a protection order case handled in a month. If you have less time to give every single day or every week, but you do have sort of sustained periods over time, a family law case is ideal for that. Family law cases are less sort of busy and intense every day, but take longer periods of time, can make an enormous difference for a child or a family, whether you're acting as guardian ad litem or representing a survivor. If you are not as interested in court opportunities and litigation, but you do want to sort of help with transactional pro bono, our immigration practice is perfect for that. Helping someone fill out an application, whether that's for a U visa or a T visa or for asylum, that can make an enormous difference in someone's life, just to help walk them through that paperwork. So there are so many opportunities. We also often have research opportunities for our policy and appellate practice area, or for any other practice area if we are working on a larger brief or an issue that we really want to write an article about or publish about. There are often opportunities there for summer associates or for legal interns, or just attorneys who are interested in the issue area and want to do some extra research. We have lots of opportunities there. We do provide a lot of training for our pro bono attorneys. So I don't want you to think that we will just throw you in. We do have hours and hours of trainings that we provide. We provide regular litigation trainings. I will shout out to the Washington Council of Lawyers that they also provide a number of training opportunities for people who are interested in pro bono work and just litigation generally. So there are so many resources to help you become a great pro bono attorney. And it really is some of the most rewarding work. I think that anybody on this panel will tell you that being able to help somebody with their legal needs is so rewarding. And I will also just say, even if you're not interested in our particular issue areas, I find that my clients have more than one legal need, right? They often have several legal needs. My clients often have housing needs. And since we can't serve them at my organization, we need to refer them elsewhere. So whatever issue area does interest you, even if it's not our issue areas, please reach out to an organization that does work that interests you, because you can make a huge difference for people.
Thank you, Ashley. Are you aware of similar organizations or similar ways to do pro bono work across the country? I know folks are tuning in from other parts of the country, not just DC, and I'm wondering if you know of similar organizations elsewhere.
So there are several. If you sort of look for volunteer lawyer projects or volunteer bars in your state or your area, I know there are several that have programs very similar to DCVLPs, where they're specifically pairing you with an attorney who sort of oversees your area. We're very fortunate that domestic violence is fairly well funded nationwide for legal service organizations. And so there are so many opportunities to work with a legal service organization in your area that serves survivors of domestic violence. I think that it's obviously a nationwide problem, something that has been on the rise during the COVID-19 crisis. And I'm sure Tracy has also seen in her practice as well. Child abuse has also been something that has been on the rise and is extremely concerning when schools are closed and virtual learning is in session, that it's much harder for us to reach children who may have been survivors of violence. And so it's incredibly important work happening nationwide. I think that any legal service organization that you reach out to will probably have a domestic violence practice. I would also encourage people to reach out to the local courts, because often the courts have panels that they will appoint pro bono lawyers from. So you can reach out to your local court system and see, particularly if you're interested in working with children's rights or being appointed as a guardian ad litem, often court systems themselves will have those opportunities.
Thank you for that, Ashley. That's very useful information. And I should echo your comments on child abuse being on the rise. I think we've also seen elder abuse being on the rise as attorneys at Legal Counsel for the elderly. You know, our client community was isolated for so long, and we know that abuse rises under those conditions. And so now more than ever, we need pro bono attorneys. And like you said, one client usually doesn't have just one problem. You know, there's different pieces to that. I want to give Sebastian an opportunity to tell us both. I'm going to ask you a two-part question, Sebastian, both about opportunities for pro bono service in DC in your practice with eviction defense work, but then I'll warn you, I'll ask the follow-up question as well of if you know if there's similar ways to do pro bono work across the country.
Sure. So thanks, Debbie. So I think in DC for eviction defense, given that there's such a great need, I'm also the volunteer coordinator for the Washington Council of Lawyers, and I'm happy to provide my contact information if anyone would like to seek volunteer opportunities in the district. My biggest contribution in that role is coordinating volunteers for the advice and referral clinic at the DC Bar Pro Bono Center. So each month, the DC Bar Pro Bono Center has these clinics where they've been virtual ever since the pandemic started, but pre-pandemic they would go in person and meet with litigants in the district who are seeking legal advice and representation. And it's very kind of fast-paced, given that there's generally a long line of people seeking legal help, but also it doesn't require too much commitment unless you want to take on the case, which is perfectly encouraged. Because you just kind of provide brief services or legal advice with the help of supervisors who mentor you with that process. As far as eviction defense and other legal services issues across the country, I recommend what Ashley said, reach out to your local legal services organizations, because chances are the problems that are facing the district, similar problems are being faced from residents in other jurisdictions. But a silver lining of this new Zoom world that we're living in is that we can have volunteer opportunities afforded to people not in the district, meaning that with Zoom and a lot of the courts are using Zoom and WebEx, you can volunteer to take on a case even though you're not living in the district. I just had a pro bono team work with one of my clients, and it was 3 attorneys. One was in Denver, one was in DC, and one was in New York. And they all successfully worked together using Zoom and email and all the technology that's afforded to us today. And they successfully represented a client. And I wouldn't notice a difference had they been in the same place or if they were across the country like they were.
That's great to hear, Sebastian. Can I ask, is the advice and referral clinic right now in DC in person, virtual, or hybrid? I would imagine that folks listening in would be curious about how that's working these days, as I know there's lots of change going on.
Yeah, so it's been virtual since the beginning of the pandemic, meaning that things are kind of coordinated a little bit differently. You are kind of assigned a case at a certain date and time over the course of I think they host the clinic for about 5 days in a month rather than just one day a month like pre-pandemic times. And so you would get a sort of a time slot and you can sign up for as many time slots as you'd like, and you would have a phone call with that person seeking legal advice then.
Thank you. That's helpful background. And thank you for sharing your contact information for folks listening today. Harmony, I wanted to circle back. You talked a little bit about this work being racial justice work earlier. I wanted to ask, where do racial justice issues intersect in this work, in your view?
Thanks, Debbie. I think that racial justice issues intersect with every area of law that we do, particularly poverty law, which we're talking about today, and housing, public benefits, criminal justice, immigration space. If you look, you don't have to look very hard, you will see that racial justice issues are intertwined with all these areas of law. And it's something that I know that it's been sort of on the radar for a lot of public interest lawyers and pro bono lawyers for a long time. It's increased, it's got more attention after 2020, summer of 2020, but we want to make sure that we continue to do it and continue to do it in a thoughtful and meaningful way. And just thinking about sort of the poverty law space, I think that the reality of the situation when we're doing these pro bono work, as well as work at Legal Aid when I was there, the vast majority of our clients and the people that needed services were overwhelmingly people in communities of color. And I think it's important to think about the context for the problems as well. And so you can say that and you can try to determine why, but when you really think about the history of systematic racism in this country, sort of is, I mean, we could go on all day. It's enlightening to sort of figure out why we are in this situation where there's such a huge split in income and housing in cities across the country, particularly noticeable in DC, where you have, I think, the biggest split between the people that have, the wealthiest people and the people that are sort of being pushed out in Ward 7 and 8, which are almost, predominantly Black and Brown residents of DC. So just taking a look back, I think racism, if we look at like the national housing policies that are enacted sort of by government and also in private practices, that's why you have sort of this huge split in housing in DC, where you have like a huge public housing and people getting evicted more often than not in Ward 7 and 8, which are Black and Brown communities. And just in history, neighbors often redlined their communities, made it impossible for middle-class families to get homes, to own homes. And today, if you look at those red lines, you will often see they overlap with the eviction maps across the country. Also, if you take education, just looking at this city, I think everyone knows there's a huge disparity. I know some of the work that Tracy was talking about would have been very helpful for my father, who grew up in DC and Southeast. And my father grew up and attended Ballou High School. He got a diploma, but no one realized that he needed special education services, or no one did anything about it. And he graduated not learning how to read or write. That had a huge economic impact on our family. I don't think his story is that uncommon. He ended up learning how to read in jail, which was pretty unfortunate, but it's just sort of the disparity in the education that you could get, that he could get in Southeast. And for example, my mother, who was white, could get, she went to one of the best, high schools, Bethesda Chevy Chase, in like, less than 30 minutes away. So just seeing those disparities and how they play out now and what effect that has on the type of law that we're doing, whether it's housing or education, I think it's important to think about. Also, the criminal justice system, we could talk about that all day, but the disproportionate rates of sentencing and access to quality representation and what effect that has on the communities directly and also economically, and even when it comes to housing, when people are pulled from their communities, when fathers are pulled, what does that look like for the rest of the families and whether or not they can afford to stay in the housing that they have. I know that Sebastian knows a lot about the housing justice, racial justice in the housing area. I would just mention that because I think it's one of the most obvious areas where we see a disproportionate impact. Just some facts, the Eviction Lab recently did a study and it shows that Black renters are nearly twice as likely to be evicted as their white counterparts nationwide. And the study also showed that for every just under 40 Black renters for every 100 white renters are in counties across the country, but yet for every 100 eviction filings, 80 of those eviction filings were Black renters. So just a huge disparity there, and more often than not, it's Black and Latinx women who are threatened disproportionately with eviction and disproportionately evicted from their homes. And just a quick fact about DC, if you're looking at Ward 2, which has among the lowest poverty rates and the smallest share of Black residents in DC, fewer than 3 out of 100 renters receive an eviction filing in 2018. By contrast, 25 out of 100 renter households receive one in Ward 7 and 8. And oftentimes those are for very small amounts, as Sebastian can attest. And oftentimes there are like these repeat filers, landlords that will file it, even if you're gonna get paid on a Friday, they will file it on a Wednesday because you're behind 1 month's, rent. And just really sort of, and even that in and of itself can sort of have a really negative effect. And there's some work done on eviction sealing in DC, which can be very helpful and pro bono attorneys can help with. So just thinking about all those things and the reality of what we want to see in our cities and who can actually afford to live in our cities. And if you want to do something about it, I think there are opportunities in every area of poverty law to make a difference.
That was so well said, Harmony. Thank you. And thank you for sharing your personal story. I have always said that I'm a poverty lawyer, and I think until recently realized I'm a racial justice lawyer. My work has always been to help vulnerable communities maintain their housing, whether that be in eviction defense work, which I did prior to doing foreclosure defense work, or in my current practice as a consumer attorney. I think where I do foreclosure defense and also debt collection work. I think that in all of the high volume court dockets where I have practice in DC, they are all predominantly defendants without attorneys from Black and Brown communities in DC. And so I do think I'll let Tracy and Ashley talk about their experience and in the dockets that they cover, but I do think that all of this work that we're talking about today, and thank you for saying it, because I don't think we can say it enough that this is racial justice equity work. Tracy, can you give us your thoughts on these issues of racial equity and the work that we do?
Absolutely. Just as you and Harmony are saying, racial justice issues are at the core of what we're doing. And you mentioned, Debbie, like maybe not thinking about it that way during all of your years of practice, but that's exactly what it is. So at Children's Law Center, the work and the practice areas that we are in, we're addressing, health harming legal needs, but these legal needs are predominantly affecting Black and Brown kids and families. And it's a health inequity as well, and it's a racial disparity. It's rooted in historic and systemic racism. As a concrete example of this, and Harmony mentioned, the eviction map and Ward 7 or 8, vibrant communities in DC, predominantly Black communities east of the Anacostia River. If you take a child with asthma who is living in, some neighborhoods in Ward 7 or 8, that child is 20 times more likely to go to the emergency room for that asthma than a child with asthma living in Ward 3, a wealthier neighborhood in DC. So it's very stark, 20 times more likely. Asthma, same age, just different neighborhood. And that asthma disparity and the health inequity is a direct result of poverty, poor housing and environment, and systemic racism. And so that housing practice that we're doing, that housing conditions practice that we're doing, it's an individual case. And so it's sort of, we're tackling it on a micro level, but it does have impact in terms of disrupting the inequities across communities. And then Harmony also mentioned, some of her own personal experiences in the education space. And at Children's Law Center, we have, the team of lawyers in the Medical Legal Partnership, about half of what we're doing is in the special education arena. And across many of those cases, we're challenging what, is termed the school to prison pipeline by many. It's a national trend that, mostly students of color, they're being funneled out of public schools into the juvenile and criminal justice systems. And many of these children and students, they have learning disabilities. They have unmet special needs, and really what they should have been receiving under the law and what they were entitled to receive was special educational services or other types of services in the school space. The fact is that the special education advocacy work that we're doing at Children's Law Center is trying to get those services in place. So by doing that, we are disrupting that racism. I would say that the majority of the families and children that our attorneys are working with, do experience the trauma of racism on a daily basis, whether it's express racism, it's implicit bias in the school setting, or the structural and historic racism that Harmony was talking about. It just permeates everything, every system and agency in the city and across the country. And it's also, we're seeing, and evidence is showing, how racism is actually a core determinant of children's health. The poverty law practice, like you were saying, Debbie, I mean, it is a racial justice practice. And the idea is that, through that individual work, you can disrupt it on an individual basis, a family basis. And that it's also a step along the way to dismantle the systemic inequities on a broader basis as well.
Absolutely. Ashley, I saw you nodding along as well. I'm wondering if you had additional thoughts that you wanted to add to this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a conversation we could have a whole other panel on, frankly. Every single one of us who does poverty law work will tell you that our work is racial justice work. And it has to be, because people of color are treated differently in this country. People of color are oppressed in ways that I think we're very fortunate sort of to be operating at a time when the systems of systemic racism and systemic poverty are really coming to the forefront of our work, and are sort of intertwined into all of the work that we do in a way that wasn't necessarily true in the past, I think. I think that public interest lawyers are talking more about intersectionality of different systems that are oppressing our clients and the ways that we need to be working together to try to address all of these issues, to help lift our clients out of poverty. I think that, you know, I was at a really interesting panel last night with Devin Carbato and Paul Butler, who are both Fourth Amendment scholars, who are incredibly brilliant. And if you have a chance to look at their work on policing and the way that communities of color are over-policed, the ways that violence is used against communities of colors can actually impact some of the work that we do. I know, you know, anecdotally, my clients who are almost entirely women of color who live in Ward 7 and 8 do not call the police when they are abused by their abuser, because they are scared for themselves. They are scared for their children. They are scared for this person who, even though that is a person who has harmed them, is a part of their community and is usually someone that they care about. And they do not want to invite police presence into their communities. They are scared that they themselves will be victims of violence. And it is incredibly frustrating to look at that and say, I know that my client deserves a life free of violence. I know that my client deserves help and deserves the resources to be brought on her behalf. But because of the effects of systemic racism on her community, she will not seek those resources out. It makes our work harder. It makes everything that we do more difficult. And it really, to be a poverty lawyer is to be a racial justice lawyer. I think you're exactly right, Debbie, that the work that we do is so important to bring the resources of the legal system to bear in favor of our clients, sometimes for the first times in their lives. And it's really, it makes it harder for our clients to trust us. It makes it harder for our clients to say, I want to reach out to a legal service provider, because they've had such negative experiences with the criminal justice system, with the legal system, generally speaking, because of systemic racism. So I think it touches everything that we do. I hope that we will see many of you in the future come to take on some of these cases with us. The work that you could do as a pro bono attorney really will make a difference.
Thank you, Ashley. I was about to say that if you all could just reach out to any one of us, or, you know, to the resources that Ashley mentioned earlier, if you're not in DC, you know, to local nonprofits in your area, to the courts in your area, to the voluntary bars in your area, to find out how you can take on pro bono cases. This really is important work, and we're at a critical time. We know that Black and Brown communities got hit the hardest in the pandemic, and they already were at risk of losing their housing. We're already facing these education challenges, the health challenges, access to justice challenges. And so it is vital that we all join in this work. And then with that, I see the Honorable Judge John McCabe, who has joined us, who also has a history in working in legal services. He has I won't attempt to give his bio right now with the minutes that we have left, because I know that is long and very impressive, but he has dedicated his career to the issues that we've been talking about today. And so we would really appreciate any remarks Your Honor has for folks attending this panel today on your thoughts on the importance of pro bono work. And again, thank you for joining us today. Oh, you're muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Right. Thank you so much for inviting me, and also to the Washington Council of Lawyers for organizing this event. Sorry, I'm a little late in signing in. One of my strengths is not technology. Join Zoom, even though that's probably one of the easier things to join. But in any event, also we wanted to thank the people who are participating for your interest in doing pro bono work. I looked at the group of panelists that you've been hearing from, and it's certainly an incredibly impressive group. I happen to know Ashley Carter, for example, from the excellent work she did when she was a law clerk here a couple of years ago. And I saw people on the panel that have worked at Legal Aid, Legal Counsel for the Elderly, Children's Law Center, a lot of the leading legal service organizations here in DC. And so I'll just tell you a little bit about, why I guess I'm here. I mean, we're at the court now for about 20 years, but like many attorneys, my career, took a lot of different turns. And I would just encourage all of you, especially who are young lawyers, to, just keep an open mind that even if, the job that you're currently at, for most of us, we change jobs a few times during our careers, and just be open to new opportunities. I started in private practice myself in the early 80s, right after college, as a paralegal at a firm here in DC. After law school, I was at a private firm in Atlanta for a few years in the late 80s. And then, just took a completely different path in my career. I worked at Legal Aid here in DC myself in the 89, 90. So it was quite a much smaller organization back then, but it was just a wonderful change for me. And I really enjoyed the one-on-one working with clients and so forth, and just kind of got my career in a completely different direction. Went from there working with cases involving children in foster care at the Office of the Corporation Counsel, domestic violence cases, civil cases. And then after working at the U.S. Attorney's Office, I came here to the court and have handled a lot of family court cases, domestic violence cases, criminal cases, and now I'm in the probate division. So one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is that the Chief Judge in Superior Court here, Judge Anita Josie Herring, she started as Chief Judge in September of 2020. And as you can imagine, one of her major challenges is dealing with how do we function as a court during COVID, but she's also kept as one of her priorities increasing pro bono representation here in DC. So she created this committee, the Committee on Pro Bono and Affordable Counsel, and asked me and another judge, Carmen McLean, to be the co-chairs of that committee. And so that's what we're working on now, is trying to make sure that the way we run our court is more open to getting more participation from pro bono attorneys. As I'm sure a lot of you know, there's just wonderful legal service organizations here in DC, like Legal Aid, Legal Counsel for the Elderly, Neighborhood Legal Services, Children's Law Center, Bread for the City. I mean, a lot of them are represented in your panel, DC Volunteer Lawyers Project. But despite their outstanding work, they just can't meet all of the needs. And so as a result, there's quite a few people who appear in our court with no attorney whatsoever. As you all know, constitutionally, there's a guarantee of counsel in criminal cases, but there simply isn't in other cases. And so in a vast majority of the family court, people don't have attorneys. And a lot of these cases are cases where you're just dealing with incredibly crucial issues in people's lives. As you can imagine, landlord and tenant cases where someone is facing eviction and you've got 90% of the people without an attorney, while landlords are represented by counsel 95% of the time. You've got cases involving possibly having their home foreclosed upon because they've fallen behind on their mortgage or taxes, getting civil protection orders, someone who's a victim of domestic violence, and then child custody cases as well are extremely important to people. As you can imagine, a judge is making decisions about how someone raises a child, how much time each parent gets to spend with the child. And too many of those people are without attorneys. So just, I encourage you to think about what a difference you can make in someone's lives, helping them avoid becoming homeless, helping them their personal safety and getting a restraining order, or also just helping them, get what's a good result for them in terms of how to raise their children. Now, for many of you, these may not be areas that you've practiced in or that are, you feel like you have a lot of experience in, but I'd urge you not to be discouraged by that, because there's incredibly good training programs that are organized by the legal service organizations here in DC that will help give you training about lands, whatever it is that you would like to do. And also there's a wide variety of types of commitment you can make. Some of them involve sort of a one-day commitment, doing like informal advice to clients so that, if your time pressures are such that you don't want to get involved in a long-term case, there's many short-term opportunities, and you can maybe start with a short-term opportunity and then decide if you want to do more. There's also obviously opportunities for much more involved representation, for example, in a child custody case where you could actually do a full trial with, direct and in cross-examinations, opening statements, closing statements, admitting exhibits, those kinds of things. And it's really rewarding work. I mean, I think a lot of us folks, if you're working, on cases where there's not as much one-to-one contact, you'll really enjoy that. And it's also just, kind of very easy to see the results of your work and how important it is to your client. And I think, you'll find you can get really good training and you'll enjoy the experience, but most importantly, you'll just make a huge difference in the lives of individual clients. And also it's just good for the cause of justice in general. I think all of us, want to make sure that the playing field is as fair as possible. And judges certainly appreciate when there's a pro bono attorney, because you just feel like you're getting more accurate information and more complete information. And that just increases the chances that we'll reach the right decision in a case. A lot of times you'll have a case and you're thinking there's probably more to this story, but I may not be hearing it because neither side has counsel or only one side has counsel. So I don't want to take up too much time because I know you have another program, I think, starting at 1:15. That also sounds like a wonderful program that on criminal issues, I believe, and death penalty issues. But I wanted to just suggest one or two things before I sign off, that if you want more information on how to get involved, I'm sure this panel and the Washington Council of Lawyers have lots of things they can send you. But I think on our court's website, which is www.dccourts.gov, there's a link to pro bono at the court, and that'll give you other links to ways to get involved. So it gives you, there's handouts about, how do you decide what type of case you'd like to do and what would fit in most with your time schedule. And then it also gives you a list of trainings on particular areas of the law that the DC Bar Pro Bono Clinic or groups like Legal Aid, Children's Law Center, et cetera, handle. So I just encourage you to click on those things, and it'll help you, help you to decide what type of work you'd like to do. And I think I saw something at the bottom about the DC Bar Pro Bono Clinic is an outstanding resource for that, if that's what Christina was referring to. And also, just the last thing I would invite you to do is, I want to make sure we're doing the most we can as a court to make life easier for pro bono attorneys. And so if you have ideas, either now or in the future about things like, hey, maybe we could adjust a little bit the way we schedule landlord and tenant hearings. I mean, that's just sort of one example. Feel free to reach out to my chambers. My email address is Judge McCabe Chambers at dcsc.gov. Because that's something that Judge McClain and I really want to, do, is be as responsive as possible, so that when people do get involved in pro bono work, that it's a, positive experience. There's not too much waiting around, that kind of thing. So that was all I had prepared. I'm very happy to answer if people have questions or anything else you'd like me to talk about, but thank you so much. I'll stay on until we're finished.
Thank you so much, Judge. Those are really crucial comments, and we really appreciate your time and your support for this work. If that concludes my questions to the panel, we're right at 1, but we have a couple more minutes before the next panel starts. I don't think I've went through the chat and I didn't see any questions. Please don't be shy. Feel free to put some questions in, either for Judge McCabe or for any of our panelists, now is the time. Or Christina, correct me if I'm wrong, folks can also just turn on their camera and ask the question.
Yes, if you'd like to ask a question in person, go ahead and raise your hand and I will give you the ability to speak. If you are a little bit more shy, certainly put your questions in the Q&A. I want to give my thanks to the panel for a phenomenal conversation. Thank you, Judge McCabe, for reinforcing all of their messages. You all will find all of their resources in the chat. We will also include that in the follow-up. I'm very grateful for you for taking the time. And I want to say specifically to you, Judge McCabe, and the rest of the judges, I was at the pro bono program you held the other day, and the court is really investing in pro bono lawyers, making it easier for you to do this work, being welcoming. The judges as a whole have said, we are happy to have pro bono lawyers. You're not going to get yelled at. It's not going to be a terrible experience. We are welcoming. And there are lots and lots of opportunities for law students. So please take advantage of those and know that we are very supportive of you giving your time, because lawyers do make a difference for their communities. Absolutely 100% full stop. And I appreciate all of your comments. Thank you all so much.